My way,
I'm on my way
to the freedom land.
to the freedom land.
I'm on my way,
I'm on my way
to the freedom land.
to the freedom land.
I'm on my way,
I'm on my way
to the freedom land.
to the freedom land.
I'm on my way, great God, I'm on my way. I'm on my way.
I'm on my way
And I won't turn back.
and I won't turn back.
I'm on my way.
I'm on my way
And I won't turn back.
and I won't turn back.
I'm on my way. And I won't turn back.
Turn back.
I'm on my way, great God, I'm on my way. So come go with me to that land. Come go with me to that land. Come go with me to that land where I'm bound. Come go with me to that land. Come go with me to that land. Come go with me to that land where I'm bound. There'll be freedom in that land. There'll be freedom in that land. There'll be freedom in that land where I'm bound. There'll be freedom in that land. There'll be freedom in that land. There'll be freedom in that land where I'm bound. There'll be justice in that land. There'll be justice in that land. There'll be justice in that land where I'm bound. There'll be justice in that land. There'll be justice in that land. There'll be justice in that land where I'm bound. There'll be singing in that land. There'll be singing in that land. There'll be singing in that land where I'm bound. There'll be singing in that land. There'll be singing in that land. There'll be singing in that land where I'm bound. There'll be singing in that land where I'm bound.
Let's do another one.
Another great little quick medley here to sing along to. I've got peace like a river. I've got peace like a river. I've got peace like a river in my soul. I've got peace like a river. I've got peace like a river. I've got peace like a river in my soul. I've got joy like a fountain. I've got joy like a fountain. I've got joy like a fountain in my soul. I've got joy like a fountain. I've got joy like a fountain. I've got joy like a fountain in my soul. I've got love like an ocean. I've got love like an ocean. I've got love like an ocean in my soul. I've got love like an ocean. I've got love like an ocean. I've got love like an ocean in my soul. I've got pain like an arrow. I've got pain like an arrow. I've got pain like an arrow in my soul. I've got pain like an arrow. I've got pain like an arrow. I've got pain like an arrow in my soul. I've got got strength like a mountain. I've got strength like a mountain. I've got strength like a mountain in my soul. I've got strength like a mountain. I've got strength like a mountain. I've got strength like a mountain in my soul. I woke up this morning with my mind and it was stayed on freedom. I woke up this morning with my mind and it was stayed on freedom. I woke up this morning with my mind and it was stayed on freedom. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. I was walking and talking with my mind and it was stayed on freedom. I was walking and talking with my mind and it was stayed on freedom. I was walking and talking with my mind and it was stayed on freedom. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. I was singing and praying with my mind and it was stayed on freedom. I was singing and praying with my mind and it was stayed on freedom. I was singing and praying with my mind and it was stayed on freedom. Hallelujah. 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 Hallelujah.
Tomorrow is Martin Luther King Jr. Day, as we know. And as we remember him, it is so easy to tell the story of the civil rights movement as though it is the story of one man or just a few people. It's Martin Luther King Jr. Day, after all, not hundreds of thousands of people who acted in big and small ways as part of the civil rights movement day. But maybe it should be renamed. Maybe that would be a truer way to tell the story. So many people, so many efforts made the successes of the civil rights movement possible. Real life heroes rarely act alone. That is the stuff of fairy tales and action movies. We know that leaders cannot lead without people who trust in their leadership. We know that communities form each of us and that much of our successes are due to mentorship and opportunity and sometimes random chance. This is not to minimize or diminish the work and legacy of Dr. King, who deserves a holiday, who we rightfully remember tomorrow, but to help us all remember that he did not act alone. We can celebrate him as an exemplar and remember that he had so many collaborators, supporters, teachers, followers. Change for the good is never the result of only one person's efforts. And in telling that story more fully, I think it also opens up the possibility for all of us to maybe not be a Martin Luther King Jr., but to be one of those people we see in the newsreel footage of marches and sit-ins, the names that don't get recorded necessarily. So maybe remember him, but also all of the people who gave their time, their health, their money, their energy to his movement, to the civil rights movement. May we continue their legacy so the dream of that movement will one day be a reality. Come, let us worship together.
Good morning. I'm Greg Feldmeyer, a member of the Sunday Services Committee. I would like to welcome everyone to the service today, whether on Zoom or in the church. We welcome you to this diverse community of seekers from many spiritual backgrounds. We are glad you are here as part of a loving, caring, inclusive community as we work toward justice, inclusion, and equality as exemplified by Rosa Parks, Lillian Smith, Viola Liuzzo, who we will be hearing about today. Thank you for being here for the first time, over many years, or for some decades. A warm welcome to you all.
So I have a few announcements as we begin. The first is that next Sunday is the beginning of our next edition of our Inquirers series class, which is our class for newcomers to learn more about People's Church. It's at 12:30 after the service. There's lunch and childcare provided. And while this is designed for newcomers, I encourage all of you to consider attending a session or two, because I know there were things that I learned in the last session, and I have been here for 7 years, 8 years, with this as my full-time job. So we don't expect everybody to learn everything all at once. So it's a nice group. It's a good way to connect with other people in the church. And another way to connect with people would be to take a moment right now to greet the people that you are seated nearby. Wish them a good morning and get to introduce yourself if you don't know them already.
I encourage you to continue these conversations and connections after our service. At this time, I would like to invite you to rise and body your spirit to sing together.
The truth We dare to proclaim we are answering the call of love. A bright new day is dawning when love will not divide. Reflections of grace in every embrace, fulfilling the vision divine. We are answering the call of love. Hands joined together as hearts beat as one, emboldened by faith, we dare to proclaim we are answering the call of love. We are answering the call of love.
And Kaya Johnson, would you please come forward to light the chalice? The chalice represents the light that we can shine into the world around us. A short poem by Amanda Gorman that she wrote some time ago. Amanda Gorman presented her poem at President Biden's inauguration, if you recall. For there is always light. If only we're brave enough to see it, if only we are brave enough to be it.
I would now like to invite our children forward for a conversation. Hi, sweetheart. Come on up. I am so glad that all of you came to church today. Thank you for being here. So I wanted to talk to you all a little bit about a woman named Rosa Parks. Have any of you heard of her before? Yeah, Grace?
I read about her.
Yeah, what do you remember about her? No? Anybody remember anything? What do you remember about her, Teddy?
That she sat in the seat on a bus, Montgomery, Alabama, and then a white man wanted to that seat, and she got arrested using that to have the white man have the seat.
So, okay, I'm going to try to get all the details right that you just told me so everybody can hear. So she was a woman who sat on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama, and she did not get up when a white man wanted to sit in that seat. And so she was arrested. And is that everything you told me? Okay. Did anybody know any other facts about her? Catherine, what do you know?
She stayed for one night.
She stayed for one night in jail, and then her people paid for her to get out. Yeah. Do you have other things to add?
Yeah, I heard in school that they actually have the bus that she had.
They do. The bus is actually in Detroit at the Ford Museum. You can go see it. I sat in her seat once. It was pretty amazing. So sometimes when we talk about Rosa Parks, people say that she sat in her seat because maybe she was just really tired that day. Have you heard that version of the story?
Maybe she just wanted to fall asleep on them.
And it wasn't because she was just really tired that day.
It's because she believed in women's rights.
Well, she believed in women's rights. She also believed that everybody should be treated equally. She also had a plan, right? She was not just tired. She had a whole team behind her. She was part of a group called the NAACP. She was their secretary. And that was a group that believed that no matter what skin color you have, you should be treated fairly. There should be no, some people sit on one part of the bus, some people sit on others, some people have to get up for other people. And it was a whole group of people who decided they were going to challenge what wasn't fair. And they picked Rosa Parks to be the person because they knew that she had gone to classes and things to teach her how to respond with kindness and patience and care, even when people were being very mean to her. She knew how to do that. Not everybody knows how to do that. Sometimes if people yell at you, you yell back, and she never did. And they knew that when stories were written about her, she didn't have any mistakes in her past that would be embarrassing. Because sometimes there were other people who sat down and wouldn't get up, but people didn't think they would be as convincing as a story. And so she worked with a bunch of people when she was arrested. And do you know what happened after she was arrested? There was a whole movement called the Montgomery bus boycott. So the Black people in that city did not ride the bus for a whole year because it wasn't fair. They walked, they got rides, they found other ways to get where they needed to go. And eventually it became more fair. And there was a young, new in town preacher there named Martin Luther King Jr., who learned a lot of what he knew about making things fair from Rosa Parks and the other people in town.
I know that guy. Also, so he was just sitting.
Oh, well, we're not going to talk about that part right now. Okay. Is there anything else that we need to say about people working together to make things fair today? What do you have to say, Gracie? Treat others the way you want to be treated. That's the golden rule. That's good advice for all of us. Catherine, do you have something to say too?
There was also another girl that chanted when she went to school because white people didn't want her to go.
Oh yes, there were Black children who helped make school more fair too, right? By going to schools that had only been for white children, and those were brave children. Brave children who we also celebrate this weekend. So there are so many heroes. And I hope hearing about all of these different heroes and all of these big teams, let's be careful, will help us all know that there are ways we can be part of teams and be heroes too. Okay? So let's go do what we can to make the world a little more fair. Okay? Okay. Now we're going to sing you guys to your classes. I'll help you get to your class, sweetheart.
Go forth in peace in search of wisdom, with love to guide you on your way. And may the joy of life surround you wherever you may go. Go forth in peace in search of wisdom, with love to guide you on your way. And may the joy of life surround you wherever you may go.
People are generous people. We are part of a team that supports one another and accomplishes more alone than we could do as individuals. Just over the past couple of weeks, I have sat in several meetings where people stepped up into roles because the church needed them to. Some of this has been with our stewardship campaign. Some of this has been with our emerging young adult ministry. Some of this has been planning for leadership transitions in the bazaar. And I have just been amazed and humbled by people who say yes and give their time to do the work of the church. I'm also appreciative when people say no, because we don't want people giving of something they can't spare, right? But there is sort of a magic that happens, I think, in groups where the people who have capacity can carry the work forward while other folks can just do the business of life when they need to do that. And we somehow move ourselves forward as though it's some great relay race of church life. So this is the part of the service where I invite you to continue to be the generous people that you are. Please give generously to support the good and important work of the church. And now we have a massive QR code up in our Commons, which I believe works from every point in the Commons. So if you've ever thought, and at home, and if you ever thought, I can't give, there's no QR code, you don't have that excuse, I guess, but it should work. And if you want to at least just try it so we know if it does, that would be great too. Even if you don't, okay, I'm seeing some thumbs up in different corners of the room. Oh, from way in the back, far corners. Okay, I think we got it. Thanks, everybody. It's me.
Giving thanks for all that sustained us from the countless gifts we each have been given, gifts of life and love and sustenance. We bring these small portions to share in the works of love, which none of us can accomplish alone. Thank you.
People's Church is a community that supports one another. One of the ways we do that is by taking time when we are gathered to share the joys, sorrows, and other milestones of our lives. If you have a joy or sorrow or milestone to share, I invite you to do that now. If you are with us on Zoom, I invite you to type it into our chat box. If you are with us here in person, I invite you to come forward, place a stone into our bowl of water, speak slowly and share your name. And if you want to just have a stone placed, you can either do that for yourself or ask for that on Zoom. sources of reason and radiance, sources of courage and compassion. Keep watch with those who work or watch or weep this day. May the suffering be soothed. May the weary find rest. May the sick be tended. May the dying and those who love them find peace. And may the joyous be shielded. And may all of us know we are wrapped in a love that surrounds us always, a web that connects us to all that exists. Our words for meditation today come from John Lewis. John Lewis was a Black man born in Alabama in 1940. He was chairman of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee from 1963 to 1966. He represented Georgia in Congress from 1987 until his death in 2020. These words are from his book, Across That Bridge, Life Lessons and a Vision for Change. Anchor the eternity of love in your own soul and embed this planet with goodness. Lean towards the whispers of your own heart. Discover the universal truth and follow its dictates. Release the need to hate, to harbor division, and the enticement of revenge. Release all bitterness. Hold only love, only peace in your heart, knowing that the battle of good to overcome evil is already won. Choose confrontation wisely, but when it is your time, don't be afraid to stand up, and speak out against injustice. And if you follow your truth down the road to peace and the affirmation of love, if you shine like a beacon for all to see, then the poetry of all the great dreamers and philosophers is yours to manifest in a nation, a world community, and a beloved community that is finally at peace with itself.
I invite you to sing along with me from your seats.
Breathe in, breathe out, breathe in. When I breathe in, I'll breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I'll breathe out love. When I breathe in, I'll breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I'll breathe out love. When I breathe in, when I breathe in, I'll breathe in peace. When I breathe out, when I breathe out, I'll breathe out love. When I breathe in, when I breathe in, I'll breathe in peace. When I breathe out, when I breathe out, I'll breathe out love.
The readings from today, the first reading is Lillian Smith, who was a white Southern writer, activist, and camp director. In 1949, she published a book of essays called Killers of the Dream, about life in the American South. It includes this passage about how racism hurts Black people and white people. The language has been slightly adjusted for our time. Something was wrong with a world that tells you that love is good and people are important, and then forces you to deny love and humiliate people. I knew, though I would not for years confess it aloud, that we white people, in trying to shut the Black race away from us, have shut ourselves away from so many good, creative, honest, deeply human things in life. I began to understand slowly at first, but more clearly as the years passed, that the warped, distorted frame we have put around every Black child from birth is around every white child too. Each of us, each is on a different side of the frame, but each is pinioned there. And I knew that what cruelly shapes and limits the personality of one is as cruelly shaping and limiting the personality of the other. I began to see that as we acquire new knowledge, live through new experiences, examine old memories, gain the strength to tear the frame from us, we are stunted and warped, and in our lifetime, we cannot grow straight anymore. Any more than a tree put in a steel-like twisting frame when young can grow tall and straight when the frame is torn away at maturity.
Our next reading is from Spilling the Light, a book of poetry by Teresa Ninan Soto. Reverend Soto is a non-binary Latinx Unitarian Universalist minister. They are the parish minister at First Unitarian Church in Oakland, California. And they write, "We hold on. There's a moment before dawn when the night is firmly in charge of the sky. There is no arguing with the opacity that holds both a fertile imagination and cover of destruction. Just hold on. There is a moment when the dream we share is newly born, wet and wriggling in our hands. Sometimes it's true that salvific futures look vulnerable and small before us. We remain unsure. Just hold on. Anything good was small at first. You know that Dr. King said, "I have a dream." It definitely was not the "I have a reality" speech. It was real in a different way that could be felt, that could be shared. They held on. That dreaming speech happened in August 1963, and you know what came before was April, a letter from the Birmingham jail. One moment did inform the other, but the future being built could not be known with certitude. They held on. We gather, Unitarian Universalists, certain only of our power to be human, finding ourselves committed to keeping our word and being our covenant. And when we fail to keep our promises, we don't throw them away, labeled as impossible. We take up our courage, we begin again, we hold on. Sprinkled in the wind, we can hear the question, if we are not white supremacy shaped into religious robes and rituals, then who are we? We are present both in attention and in the answer. We are here. We hold on. We contain multitudes, not just of questions and contradictions, but also of possibilities. We continue to labor for the creation of community in which all of us, not just each, but every part of us, is welcome in our home of faith. We hold on.
I invite you all to rise and body your spirit to sing together.
Come sing a song with me. Come sing a song with me. Come sing a song with me, that I might know your mind. And I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love that arose in the winter time. Come dream a dream with me. Come dream a dream with me. Come dream a dream with me, that I might know your mind. And I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love that arose in the winter time. Come walk in rain with me. Come walk in rain with me. Come walk in rain with me, that I might know your mind. And I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love that arose in the winter time. Come share a rose with me. Come share a rose with me. Come share a rose with me, that I might know your mind. And I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and a rose in the winter time.
Today, in my continued quest to make Martin Luther King Jr. Day a day for honoring both Dr. King and the hundreds of thousands of other people, who made the successes of the civil rights movement possible, I continue our series highlighting a lesser known person from the civil rights movement, to remind ourselves that there were all kinds of people in that movement. And when we don't only hold up these exemplary heroes, there is room for all of us in the work of beloved community. So last year, I told the story of Bayard Rustin, a gay Black man who led the civil rights movement towards its commitment to nonviolence, ghostwrote many of Dr. King's early speeches, and was the lead organizer of the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. If you don't know his story, if you don't remember, if you weren't here last year, spend some time learning it. He's an exemplary human. And today we turn our attention to Viola Liuzzo. Viola was not a leader, she followed. She answered the call of love and traveled from her home in Detroit to Selma, Alabama in March 1965 to support the voting rights campaign there. And she was murdered. She was a Unitarian Universalist and the only white woman killed as part of their participation in the civil rights movement. She is a modern martyr for voting rights, for our commitment to democracy. Viola Liuzzo was born in 1925 in Pennsylvania. Her parents were a coal miner and a teacher, and they moved to rural Georgia when Viola was 6 in search of work during the hard years of the Great Depression. When Viola was there we go. When Viola was 10, her father lost his hand in a mining accident. And so the family struggled as her mom became the primary earner. And they moved frequently in rural Georgia and Tennessee in search of work, often temporary teaching positions. And those were hard years for so many people, including Viola's family. During that time, Viola experienced the segregation of the American South and bristled against it. She knew it wasn't right, and she was a child who couldn't do anything about it. She left school when she was 14 and began working to support her family. When the Second World War began, the family moved to Michigan, and Viola and her mother worked in defense plants, and the family found financial security, as so many did in that time. When she was 18, she got married. She married her supervisor, and she was married for 7 years and had 2 children. Then they divorced, and within a year after that divorce, Viola married Jim Liuzzo, her husband until her death. Jim was also born in Pennsylvania, also the child of a coal miner. He was a high-ranking leader in the Teamsters Union, and they had 3 children together who lived to adulthood. Viola and Jim also had 3 pregnancy losses and 1 child who only lived a few days. So making sense of those losses was the beginning of Viola's spiritual quest. Viola had converted to Catholicism when she married Jim, and a priest told her that her baby, who was born still, wouldn't go to heaven because he hadn't been baptized. And she left the Catholic Church. One of her daughters remembers her saying, "I would never do that to a child. How could an all-loving God do that?" So her search for a new religion led her to the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Detroit, where her universalist understanding of God was affirmed. Jim Liuzzo said of his wife, "She was the biggest-hearted woman you ever saw in your life. Her big heart was her downfall." While she was raising young children, most of her big-heartedness was focused on her children and her immediate circle. About a month before her death, there was a big snowstorm in Detroit, February of 1965. They had over 2 feet of snow in their backyard, but somehow a rose punched through the snow and bloomed. Viola took a picture of that rose and wrote on the back of the print once it was developed, "This is typical of the love in the Liuzzo house." So their love was a rose in wintertime, and Viola was its faithful gardener. Her youngest child was born medically fragile, and the doctors told her that that child would not live long. But Viola cared for her and exercised her and did all the things that anybody could think to do, and that child grew up healthy, living to adulthood. Her children reported that she was always taking in every stray animal she could find. And once a neighbor's house caught fire on Christmas Eve, and Viola called up the owner of the local toy store at home in the middle of the night to demand that he opened so she could go and buy the toys so that family could have a Christmas morning. As her children grew, Viola's big-heartedness stretched wider. In 1964, Michigan passed a statute that allowed children to drop out of school at 16 without parental permission. The age had been 18, and Viola, who had deep regrets about her own leaving school when she was 14, protested this to the school board. Viola started working again, and she rallied against unfair labor practices and sex discrimination on the job. She enrolled at Wayne State, and her awareness was expanded through classwork, classmates, and campus activism. She was in her late 30s at this point, befriending classmates who were half her age and learning and supporting them as they all learned and grew together. In 1964, the end of 1964, Viola was 39, and the Selma voting rights campaign began. The details are beyond the scope of what I can tell you today. I had a first draft that was like a 50-minute long sermon, and I know you all, that's not our tradition. We don't preach like that here. But these are the details. The Civil Rights Movement wanted a Voting Rights Act passed that would protect everyone's access to voting. They didn't have the votes in Congress, so acts of civil disobedience began in many places, but a lot near Selma, Alabama. And in Selma, Alabama, or near, a young Black voter registration worker named Jimmy Lee Jackson was murdered by state troopers. Activists wanted to honor his life with a procession from Selma to the state capitol in Montgomery. On March 7th, 1965, that march began, a day now known as Bloody Sunday. White law enforcement officials beat Black nonviolent protesters as they sought to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge. John Lewis, the congressman whose words we heard earlier, had his skull fractured that day. Footage of this violent attack was broadcast on the nightly news into living rooms nationwide. Perhaps some of you remember that. Viola Liuzzo was one of the people watching that night, and her children recall her weeping. The campaign did not stop. Martin Luther King Jr. called for clergy from across the country to come join this campaign, and priests and rabbis and nuns and ministers and pastors of many traditions came to Selma. On the evening of March 9th, the Reverend James Reeb, a white Unitarian Universalist minister from Boston, was killed. He was clubbed to death by white supremacists. And he's another one of our modern martyrs. After that, Dr. King addressed the nation saying, "If you believe in justice, come be with us." Viola was one of thousands who answered that call. She drove to Selma and was put to work as a volunteer coordinator. People who remember her from that time, the final week of her life, remember her continued big-heartedness. She stayed with a Black family in Selma, one of 6 women with cots next to each other in the living room. She befriended her host family and made arrangements for their 17-year-old daughter to come live with the Liuzzos in Detroit to get a fresh start. On March 21st, the march began under the protection of a federalized Alabama National Guard. The marchers walked 12 miles a day for 4 days. Only a small number of marchers were allowed to sleep on the route. So Viola and others were in charge of transportation, getting people to and from the march beginning and end points every day back to Selma to sleep. And she also worked at nursing stations along the route, giving people first aid. On March 25th, the group arrived in Montgomery. Throughout the march, marchers waved American flags and sang the Star-Spangled Banner. Only the Alabama state flag and the Confederate battle flag flew over the state Capitol building when they arrived. There were many speeches that day. Civil rights activist and future ambassador to the United Nations, Andrew Young, said, "We won't break a window. We won't even curse anybody. We only come with the power of our souls and the presence of our bodies to love the hell out of the state of Alabama." When the march ended, the federal protection for the marchers ended as well. The National Guard were no longer tasked with keeping these people safe. So Viola and others drove people back to Selma, to the airport, to wherever they needed to be. And there was a rush to do this before nightfall because people were very worried about violence. As dusk was settling, Leroy Moulton, a 19-year-old local Black man who had recently been fired from his job because of his voter registration efforts, needed to get from Selma to Montgomery. And Viola volunteered to take him there before she started driving home to Detroit. On the dark road, they were followed by 4 members of the Klu Klux Klan, angry to see a car with a white woman and a Black man inside. They drove up alongside the car and shot into it. Viola was killed. Leroy was not. He lay still in the car, even when the shooters returned to make sure everyone was dead. He then flagged down a car, and they drove to the closest safe place and alerted the authorities. Arrests were made the next day. The men in the car that night who fired the shots were found not guilty by an all-white jury in Alabama. Later, they were tried federally for violating Viola's civil rights, and they were convicted. This was the first conviction of Klan members in the modern civil rights era. The Voting Rights Act was passed in 1965 in August, and the deaths of white people, our people, James and Viola, shifted public opinion and congressional votes. And that's most of the story that was known then. But now we know more about the story of the death of Viola Liuzzo. One of the reasons that her name has faded from memory is a smear campaign by the FBI. There was an undercover FBI informant in the car with the Klan members who killed Viola. And there are some testimonies that it is this undercover FBI agent who fired the shots. He had been involved with other acts of violence perpetuated by the Alabama Klan. So after the quick arrests were made, J. Edgar Hoover, the director of the FBI then, wanted to divert attention from the work his agency was supporting, was stretched beyond this one informant engaged in violence to systematic efforts to discredit all of the public leaders of the civil rights movement and so many other movements on the political left. FBI officials said Viola Liuzzo was abusing drugs. There was no evidence of this. They said her husband was involved in organized crime or communism because he had an Italian last name and works with the Teamsters. There's no evidence of that. They said she was mentally ill. And while she had received some mental health care previously, there's no evidence that she was living with unmanaged mental illness. They said she had abandoned her children, and the children were in the care of their father and Viola's best friend. They said she had a sexual relationship with the Black man beside her when she died. There's no evidence of that. These suggestions from the government were enough to dismiss Viola as some strange outsider who maybe even deserved her death. And this is not a conspiracy theory that they did this. This is fact. Documents detailing these efforts have been found through the Freedom of Information Act. Our government smeared a dead woman who was killed for her involvement in the civil rights movement. And let's be clear, even if every single one of those FBI lies were true, she still would not have deserved to die. None of those actions merit murder. A bad reputation is not a death sentence, except in the court of public opinion. Viola was ahead of her time, which also made her harder to celebrate. She was a mother of 5 who left her children in the care of others to do important work in the world. This was before the second wave of feminism. There was no cultural room for mothers like her. A few months after she was killed, Ladies' Home Journal commissioned a poll of American women. This question is amazing. They asked, no matter what your own opinions are on the question of voting rights, do you think that Mrs. Viola Liuzzo had a right to leave her 5 children to risk her life for a social cause or not? And only 26% thought she had a right to go. I know many of you here lived through this era, this shift, this change, and I just want to thank you. And so many others for all you have done that made those poll results seem incomprehensible to me now, less than 60 years later. But she was no hero to most people, and she didn't have anyone to protect her legacy. Her family was overwhelmed with their grief and the hatred directed at them. Crosses were burned in their yard, their windows were shot out, classmates threw stones at Viola's children. Hateful calls and mail just came and came and came. And she wasn't part of any organization that could have protected her memory and challenged the government's lies. The leaders of the civil rights struggle rightly devoted themselves to continuing their work. Protecting Viola's reputation was not their priority, and it shouldn't have been. They had other things. And so she was forgotten or remembered wrongly when she was remembered at all. In the weird equations that shape our politics, the deaths of Jimmy Lee Jackson, James Reeb, and Viola Liuzzo helped pass the 1965 Voting Rights Act. At Viola's funeral, Martin Luther King Jr. said, "If physical death is the price some must pay to save us and our white brothers from eternal death of the spirit, then no sacrifice can be more redemptive." I don't know if the math of this calculates when dying for a cause is worth it or not. I do know that the Voting Rights Act, the law that thousands marched for from Selma to Montgomery, that 3 people died for, is not as strong as it once was. The Supreme Court voided portions of the act in 2013. And in the decades since, it has become much harder to vote, especially in places in our country where not all people could vote in 1965. The calculus shifts, doesn't it? When the law they died for is no longer as strong as it once was. And I know that many of you, many of us are deeply involved in efforts to protect our democracy, ranging from electoral activism to voter registration, to the recent amendments to our state constitution that make voting easier and more secure. All of that work is faithful. It is carrying forward our commitment to democracy to meet this moment. It is carrying forward the work of these martyrs so their deaths can have as much meaning as deaths ever can. I'm closing today with words from Tony Liuzzo, one of Viola's children. He shared these words at the site of his mother's death by the side of a highway in Alabama as part of the campaign to support the 1982 Voting Rights Act reauthorization. He said, "The spirit of my mother, Dr. King, and of every brave soul who laid down their life for freedom lives inside of us today. We will go on all across the nation to say we shall be free and we shall overcome one day. May it be so. May we make it so. And amen."
I invite you all to rise and body your spirit one final time to sing together. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. We'll walk hand in We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we'll walk hand in hand someday. Oh, be free. We shall all be free. We shall all be free someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall all be free someday. We shall live in peace. We shall live in peace. We shall live in peace someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall live in peace someday.
So on this Martin Luther King Jr. weekend, may we find that love within us that is like a rose in the wintertime. And may we go out to do our part of the work to love the hell out of this world. Let us go in peace and go in love.